Have you ever looked at your marriage and felt strangely calm, not relieved, not grateful, just quiet in a way that feels oddly flat? Nothing is technically wrong. There are no constant arguments, no obvious betrayals, no daily tension filling the room. Life moves forward smoothly enough. Schedules align. Responsibilities are handled. From the outside it looks steady, even healthy. But inside, something feels distant, like you are standing beside each other instead of with each other. You share space, routines, history, but the emotional exchange feels thinner than it used to. Not painful, not dramatic, just absent enough to notice in moments of stillness. That absence is often what goes unnamed the longest. Emotional disconnection rarely announces itself loudly. It does not usually arrive through crisis or conflict. More often, it settles in quietly, wrapped in cooperation, mutual respect, and the comfort of predictability. Because the marriage still functions, the distance feels easy to dismiss. You tell yourself this is what long-term partnership looks like. The passion fades, the depth naturally softens. But there are specific emotional patterns that distinguish peaceful coexistence from genuine connection. Not signs of failure, not accusations, just observable shifts that reveal what is actually being shared anymore. Here are 10 signs a marriage is quietly functioning, not truly connected. 1. Conversations stay practical. Most exchanges revolve around logistics, schedules, responsibilities, and problem solving, with very little emotional curiosity left inside them. You talk often, but the content rarely touches anything vulnerable, uncertain, or internally alive. There is efficiency, cooperation, and mutual competence, but not much exploration of inner experience. Over time, the marriage begins to feel like a well-run system rather than an emotionally shared life. Nothing feels unsafe, yet nothing feels particularly revealing either. You may not argue much, but you also do not linger in conversations that deepen understanding. The absence is subtle, because communication still exists, simply no longer invites closeness. The silence is not empty of words. It is empty of emotional risk. 2. Affection feels habitual rather than expressive. Physical closeness continues, but it feels more routine than emotionally charged. Hugs happen out of habit. Kisses are brief and functional. Touch becomes familiar without carrying much emotional information. There is nothing overtly wrong with it, yet something feels missing underneath the gestures. Affection no longer reflects desire, curiosity, or emotional presence. It serves as reassurance that the relationship is intact, rather than as a way to feel into each other. Over time, touch becomes symbolic rather than connective. It maintains structure, but rarely deepens emotional exchange. The body participates while the emotional layer quietly withdraws. 3. Conflict is rare, but so is repair. Disagreements happen infrequently, which appears healthy on the surface. But when tension does arise, it tends to be smoothed over quickly rather than explored. Issues dissolve through avoidance, humor, or quiet withdrawal instead of emotional engagement. There is a shared preference for peace over understanding. Nothing escalates, but nothing truly resolves either. Over time, this creates emotional distance disguised as harmony. The relationship feels calm, but also emotionally static. Repair is minimal because rupture is minimal, yet depth never increases. Without emotional repair, intimacy slowly thins. The calm becomes maintained, not cultivated. 4. Personal growth happens separately. Each partner continues evolving, learning, and reflecting, but mostly on their own. There is little emotional sharing around internal changes, doubts, or emerging perspectives. You update each other on events, not on inner shifts. Growth becomes parallel rather than shared. The marriage remains stable, but the emotional worlds drift slightly apart. There is no conflict about this separation, only quiet acceptance. You respect each other's independence, yet feel less emotionally involved in each other's inner lives. Over time, curiosity fades. You know what your partner does, but less about who they are growing into. The connection remains polite, not intimate. 5. Emotional support feels limited but acceptable. Support exists, but it stays within a narrow emotional range. You can rely on each other for practical help, reliability, and presence during obvious stress. But deeper emotional vulnerability feels less accessible. You hesitate to bring certain feelings into the relationship, sensing they might not land fully. Not because of rejection, but because of emotional flatness. Responses feel measured, reasonable, but not deeply attuned. Over time, you begin self-soothing instead of emotionally reaching. The marriage still feels safe, but not emotionally nourishing. Support remains functional rather than connective. Needs shrink quietly to fit the available space. 6. Shared joy feels muted. Positive moments exist, but they do not expand or linger. Laughter happens, but briefly. Celebrations feel understated. Joy does not ripple outward or deepen connection the way it once did. There is a subtle emotional restraint around excitement. Nothing feels suppressed, yet nothing feels fully expressed either. You enjoy each other's company, but the emotional resonance feels mild. Shared joy becomes calm satisfaction rather than emotional aliveness. The marriage feels content, but rarely energizing. Pleasure exists, but it does not bond you more tightly together. 7. Inner worlds are rarely invited in. Thoughts, fears, longings, and unresolved emotions are often processed internally rather than shared. You may journal, reflect, or talk to others instead, not because your partner is unsafe, but because sharing feels unnecessary or effortful. The marriage functions without deep emotional disclosure. Over time, emotional self-containment becomes the norm. You coexist comfortably, but with limited emotional permeability. The relationship does not ask much of your inner life. That ease feels relieving, but also distancing. Intimacy requires invitation. Here, the door remains mostly closed without conflict. 8. Routine replaces intentional presence. Daily life runs smoothly, supported by habits that no longer require conscious attention. Meals, evenings, and weekends follow predictable patterns. There is comfort in the rhythm, but little intentional emotional engagement inside it. Time together feels automatic rather than chosen. Presence becomes physical, not emotional. You are often near each other without feeling particularly connected. Routine carries the relationship forward, reducing the need for emotional effort. Nothing breaks, yet nothing deepens. The marriage is sustained by structure rather than active relating. Stability slowly takes the place of intimacy. 9. Silence feels neutral, not intimate. Being quiet together does not feel tense, but it also does not feel bonding. Silence is simply empty space, not shared presence. There is no discomfort, yet no sense of emotional attunement either. You coexist peacefully without much emotional exchange. Silence does not invite closeness or reflection. It merely fills time. Over time, you stop expecting emotional depth from shared stillness. The quiet becomes emotionally flat. Not lonely, but not connecting. The marriage feels companionable, not emotionally intertwined. 10. You rarely miss each other emotionally. Absence does not create much emotional pull. Time apart feels manageable, sometimes even easier. You miss routines more than presence. Reunions feel familiar rather than meaningful. There is no longing to emotionally reconnect. The attachment feels secure, but low intensity. You care deeply, but without emotional hunger. The relationship feels steady, but not alive. This absence of longing often feels normal until you notice it clearly. Connection fades quietly when it no longer calls you back. A marriage can function smoothly while emotional connection slowly thins. That does not make it broken, dishonest, or doomed. It means the relationship has shifted into maintenance rather than engagement. Many couples live here for years without naming it because nothing feels urgent enough to question. The routines work, the respect remains, life continues. But emotional connection is not sustained by absence of conflict alone. It requires shared presence, emotional exchange, and mutual curiosity. When those fade quietly, the marriage adapts instead of collapses. Understanding this distinction is not about judgment. It is about recognizing what kind of connection is actually being lived beneath the surface of stability. Sometimes distance does not arrive through loss, but through quiet adaptation. What feels calm can still feel empty. Seeing that clearly changes how the silence is understood. Thank you for being present with this reflection.